From an ancestral perspective, when did salt come on the scene? And how do you look at that as part of a healthy diet?
What we can tell from salt, and again, this is a difficult thing to interpret fully in the archaeological record, but what we can tell from some archaeological sites, and we can definitely tell from historic records, salt was incredibly sought after since anything's been recorded or anything's been left behind that we can tell from archaeological sites. So salt has always been incredibly important. So important, in fact, that people's migratory patterns, remember I mentioned earlier, they were incredibly nomadic, would often include stops to places where you could access salt, or you could trade for salt with other groups. So salt is very important. I will tell you, we just went out a few months ago. Christine and I were invited to Redmond, out in Utah, Redmond salt mines, and blown away on a number of different levels, because I always knew how important salt was, but they gave us a full deep dive lesson. We got to tour the mines. We got to see the entire company. And after leaving there, I was blown away by not only the product, but also the company culture they have there. Because we love to support people that make good products. We really love to support people that make good products that have a good company culture as well. And it was incredibly impressive on all accounts. But one thing that was brought up multiple times, prior to that, the only other access to salt we really had in any, or salt sort of experience we had in any of our travels, was when we were in Sicily. We were doing some cheese research in Sicily, and we went to a place called Trapani in the northwest coast of Sicily, not terribly far from Palermo. And these salt flats, like other salt flats in the world, are right next to the sea, and they let in the water, and they're huge, like football field size areas that let in just a little bit of water, very salty water. And over the day, it evaporates. And a lot of times they move it from salt flat to salt flat to salt flat as things fall out of suspension. And they do this to refine the salt. And by the end of it, all you have left is salt, and all the minerals have actually dropped out. And they take the minerals and they sell them to supplement companies and things like this. But at the end of it, you just have salt. But one thing I think people absolutely need to realize is some of these key words we put that are in our dietary sort of mindset are silly words. Like sea salt is a silly word, because every bit of salt in the world, dietary salt that we put into our mouths, is sea salt. It all was in the sea at some point, whether it's a mile underground at Redmond Mine or whether it's a salt flat in Sicily, it's all sea salt. One of the biggest differences is when was it in the sea, right? The stuff in Sicily came out of the sea yesterday. The stuff in Redmond, I don't even know how many millions of years ago it was in the sea. So the things that are in the sea now are also in that salt, right? For better or for worse, and likewise in the past. So it was all sea salt. When was it in the sea? And has it been refined? And what additives have been added to it? And once you sort of look at it from that perspective, salt becomes very clear. I want salt with the highest mineral content from an ancient sea, if at all possible, with no additives whatsoever. So things like Himalayan salt is great. Redmond's is great. I mean, there's more than just those two, but those really, really come to mind as. And then the only other thing to really consider with salt, and I know this conversation is about salt, but I did a deep dive into salt recently. Salt is one of those really interesting things that when we're making a decision about what we should cook with or how should we include things in our diets, our filters we should think about more things than we typically do. And one of them is, what's the experience of eating it? Salt is such a poster child for this, because the shape and size of the salt genuinely impacts the experience of consuming that salt. And this is my example I always use. The first time I made mint chocolate chip ice cream many, many years ago, I was so excited. I had raw milk, raw cream. I went out and I got like the highest quality mint extract to use. It was all ready to go. I had my little home ice cream maker and I'm making it. But the one thing I forgot, at the very end, you have to add the chocolate into it. I'm like, oh my God, I don't have any chocolate. What am I going to do? And the only thing we had in our cupboard, this is years ago, we don't have it in our cupboard now, but we had Toll House morsels. You put in chocolate chip cookies. I had a bag of those. So I threw those in. and made it. And I'm all excited about my ice cream. And that night after dinner, I said, okay, family, we're going to have ice cream. And I handed it out. And the first thing that the family noticed was that it wasn't green because I didn't add any coloring to it. But they got over that pretty quickly. And then they started eating it. And I could tell by their faces, it went into their mouth and they had a smile. And then all of a sudden they had this confused look for a minute. I'm like, what's wrong? I'm like, I don't know, but I can't put my finger on it, but something's wrong. And I've realized what it was. It was the chocolate. It wasn't that the chocolate was any different quality. It was the shape of the chocolate. Mint chocolate chip ice cream has thin slabs of chocolate that have a little bit of a bite for a second, and then it has so much surface area it melts on your tongue. But the Toll House morsels were just these morsels, right? And you crunch and crunch and crunch and crunch. The experience was different. When we started making sourdough pretzels for our sourdough bakery, the first thing we did was put kosher salt on them. That's all that I had. And even though chemically it's the same thing as pretzel salt, it's sodium chloride, the experience of eating that pretzel wasn't the same. You know, you eat our pretzels now, we put pretzel salt on it. It has a specific shape. It's sodium chloride. It's exactly the same thing. But the act of eating it, how it feels in your mouth is different because of the shape of it. And we know there's things like mold-on salt and all those other things. So the highest quality mineral salt, most ancient sea possible, with the shape that makes the most sense, with absolutely no additives whatsoever, is exactly what we look for now.
Coming back to our ancestors in salt, there's 3 different areas I can think of off the top of my head they may have wanted to use it for: preservation, nutrition, and taste. Do we know if those were all reasons they used it? And then are there any others?
I have no idea that answer, except I cannot imagine a world. Food is so, and we've talked about this before, food permeates everything that we are as humans. The experience of preparing and eating and sharing food is a uniquely human thing. And it's a powerful, powerful thing. And it's not a new powerful thing. I consider this to be a very ancient, powerful thing. And I cannot imagine that our ancestors cared any less than we do today about qualities of that experience, like taste and texture and aroma and those sorts of things. So I'm convinced that it had to be a part of all of that. Well, we know we need it for preservation. There's no doubt. But the taste part, I'm sure. The only other thing I could add to that probably is, and I'll bring up Redmond's as an example. When I only knew Redmond before we went out there as a source of high quality, incredibly nutritious salt for humans. I didn't have any idea until they started talking to us that a large part of their company is creating things for animals, for animals that we've raised. But then when we went on the tour, we went into the fact the first thing we saw, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world, is they were packaging up all the salt blocks that go to Cabela's and Bass Pro Shop for hunters to put out into the woods. I cannot imagine a world in which that also wasn't a part of it for our ancestors, that understood that animals need salt just as much as humans do, and it wasn't a way to actually get animals to come to a certain place. That said, I'll also give you another very quick example. We were doing some research in West Pokot, Kenya, on a yogurt, this stuff called Mursic, this ancestral ash yogurt. And on the way there, we met some archaeologists who invited us to see a site that they were working on. It was at a place called Mount Elbin, I believe it was called. And they took us to a cave. And this cave was a huge cave. But the cave, turns out, it was built by elephants over thousands of years. And the reason the elephants built this, literally mined this cave out, this huge cave, was because it had such mineral-rich, part of it was sodium chloride, salt, but this mineral-rich earth that the mountain was built on. So they spent over thousands of years with their tusks. They were, digging away this mineral-rich earth and consuming it. And they went there every day. And the reason that it's important in this conversation is because when poaching was a thing still, it was a place that poachers would go, and they'd go over top of the cave, and every single day the elephants would come and they would shoot these elephants. So they knew that these animals were coming to the salt and the other minerals on a regular basis. So I'm confident that salt was probably used in the past as well as a source of successful hunting.
It's obvious you've went deep into this salt topic. And we've talked about, when it comes to plants and animals, the importance of diversity. You're obviously a fan of this Redmond salt now that you've been there and seen everything that goes on behind the scenes. Because there are so many different salts out there from so many different places, do you feel it's necessary to have different ones at different times? Or is finding one like Redmond's and just going all in on it enough?
That is a fantastic question. From a nutritional, I'm not the person to ask for this, but I'll still give you my take on it. From a nutritional perspective, I think finding an incredibly high quality source like Redmond is sufficient from a nutritional perspective. But we have the other part of the equation is we have some companies that are doing a really, really, really good job of creating great resources for us in our food system and literally bucking the system and trying very hard. And it's not, I'm from somebody who owns a restaurant right now trying to do the same thing. It is not an easy task. So I would suggest that if you find different salt or any other resource supplier that's doing a great job, I think it's important from an economic perspective to spread the wealth out a little bit and support as many as you possibly can. Because we are literally fighting an uphill battle. We are fighting a multi-trillion-dollar industry in order to make these changes. So again, I love Redmond. I love Redmond because it is a very high quality product, and I love Redmond because it is an incredible company with an incredible company culture. We will still continue to support other ones as well, but I think that's a very important thing to do, not necessarily from a nutritional perspective, but from another perspective. And the final thing, and I only touched on this briefly, but this is really, really, really important. If you're like, fine, I get it, but I'm not really there with the salt right now. Fine, I get it. We have to take these steps as they become available to us. But look at the salt that you buy. I don't care what the labeling's like. I don't care if it comes from Whole Foods or not. Turn it around and look at the back of it. The only thing that should be on that label is salt. If there's anything else on there, we don't need anti-caking agents. We don't need anything on there whatsoever except for salt. Even if it says sea salt on the front and has a beautiful picture, turn it around and look on the back of it. At the very least, do your body a favor and make sure there are no preservatives or no anti-caking agents. There's nothing in there besides pure salt.
How do you feel about iodine being added to salt? Because your typical table salt, it seems like that's a standard thing. And from what I've heard, iodine in the diet these days is pretty hard to come by. So a couple different pieces there. Iodized salt, and then how you think about iodine.
The 19-teens and the 1920s, and even bleeding into the 1930s, I know we have an incredibly poor diet right now. Like we are, and many would consider this an all-time low for the modern American diet. And for certain things it is. But I will tell you, those decades in the early 1900s saw some of the biggest deficiencies we've ever had in our country. And it's the same time when we start seeing all this fortification of food in our food system. It's when we start fortifying baked goods with niacin, for example. It's the same time we start fortifying salt with iodine. Was it 1920s? I forget the exact year that it happened. It happened in the Midwest. And the reason it happened is because our diets were becoming less and less and less diverse, and especially in the middle part of our country where we didn't have access to seafood, iodine wasn't in the diet, and people had a huge iodine deficiency. So the knee-jerk reaction from our country was not to improve the food system; it was to put iodine in the salt because salt was consumed so widely. There's several problems with that. One is we can sufficiently get iodine, and we can get iodine in a better, more digestible, more bioavailable form if we get it from food. One of the best sources of iodine is seaweed, period. And it doesn't take a whole lot in order to fortify. One of the things we do here at the Modern Stone Age Kitchen is we have bone broth on tap, and one of the things we offer on it is some dulse, which is one of my favorite seaweeds. Most of it comes from Ireland. You can get it from other places. You can get it incredibly high quality stuff right off Amazon, and put some of that on your bone broth in the morning every day, or whatever hot beverage you're consuming. And that is a great way to do it. I forget the exact number. I'm not an iodine expert. I would make sure I went to other sources of information, but somewhere around 80% of the iodine in iodized salt is not even usable by the body anyhow. The problem and again, I'm not the person to ask because I'm not an iodine expert. I'm worried about iodine supplementation without consultation with somebody that does know about iodine, because while it's very difficult to overdose on iodine from food sources and practically impossible to do from salt, it is possible to do with supplements if the available form of iodine you're taking with supplements is fully bioavailable. So iodine is incredibly essential to our bodies. I believe if we have a diverse diet with the right foods, we can get it from our diets in most cases. But if you're going to supplement with it, from what I understand, I would make sure that I'm referring to somebody that knows a lot about it to understand which I should take and what I should take. But I don't believe iodine and salt is something that we should be paying attention to anymore. And I've never had iodized salt in my diet my entire life, and it's definitely not in our restaurant.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
We went to Sardinia. The place in Sardinia we were at was actually the epicenter of the first blue zone ever identified. It was not only in Sardinia, it was actually in the same village. What we experienced there was the exact opposite from a food perspective.